Well, good afternoon and welcome to this GIRI and Temporary Works Forum webinar where we're looking at avoiding error in temporary works and looking at how temporary works design plays a key part in avoiding. I'm going to give a short introduction about GIRI for those of you who are not familiar with us, and then I'll hand over to Rob and Alexandros, who will take you through the impacts of temporary works on project delivery, and then there'll be some time for Q&A. On the housekeeping front, can I ask you to mute your microphones if you're not speaking, but you can turn them on if invited to ask a question. If you keep your videos on, that's great because it gives us a bit more, the meeting feeling a bit more vitality. And use the chat box if you've got questions or comments as we go, and that's will be our source of picking things up later. If you have any tech problems, well, the usual advice, turn off and try again. I leave the meeting and then rejoin using the same link. So back in 2015, an ICE best practice group asked themselves the question, how much is error costing the industry? And the conclusion was, we don't know. GIRI was founded and obtained funding from industry to carry out a research project to establish the cost to the industry of error and its root causes. This research culminated in the issue of our strategy for change. Let's have a look at some of the key findings. We employed grounded theory analysis and the Delphi method in our research, and this is a summary of the results. We found the overall wasted spend on error amounts to 21% of turnover. There's the direct cost of error, which is perhaps more easily measurable from NCRs and the like on site with our tablets and so forth, and this comes out at 5%. There's the indirect cost of error, and this is the impact on third parties, particularly in terms of delay and disruption, and this amounted to 7% of turnover. Unrecorded process waste at 6% is where errors occur and are corrected without being recorded. And then latent defects are those which are identified after handover at a cost of 3%. Now, this has a range depending on project size and complexity of 10 to 25%, but it's still an order of magnitude higher than average construction company profit margins. And it's worth noting that studies in the USA and Australia have come up with similar results. So it's pretty much a no-brainer that we need to do something about it. The research concluded that these were the top 10 root causes of error, and GIRI's activities following the results of these research have been targeted on these high-ranking causes. Planning tops the list, and this is planning both in the macro sense of overall project planning and in the micro sense of thinking about daily tasks. Design features in 6 of the items on the list and is clearly an area for attention. Culture is important, as well as coping with financial and time pressures, and supervisory skills also a major factor. So planning, a fundamental in terms of achieving our planned delivery is productivity. Let's take a look at the contextual logic behind the GIRI philosophy about productivity. The definition of productivity we use is based on inputs and outputs. We relate these to effectiveness and efficiency. So efficiency is the ratio of amount produced, the output, for a stated amount of time and resource, which is the input. And we're very familiar with this definition of efficiency. Effectiveness relates primarily to the quality of outputs, however that may be defined in a specification or otherwise. Improving productivity relates to both of these because efficiently producing the wrong thing is clearly not productive. So GIRI was established following the original research as a not-for-profit, membership-based organisation with the strategic aim of improving industry productivity through the elimination of error. and we became a limited company in 2017. The research demonstrated the link between error elimination and productivity, and this helped to convince businesses in the industry as to the benefits of investing in a zero error program. We've got a wide variety of members, over 130 companies right across the industry, and this helps us to give us the widest possible background on which to base our research and the following recommendations and proposals. So let's take a quick look at how GIRI is going about achieving its objectives. We have our thought leadership through training. GIRI's developed training courses targeted on the cultural change needed to avoid error. These courses are CITB accredited, and they're all available through our website. And our recent report on the feedback from training showed that in one of our in our train the trainer efforts, we've saved £92 million. There's also our framework for the systematic avoidance of error. And then we have these webinars and forums such as today. On the knowledge sharing front, we have our research. We've carried out a number of research projects, including the original research, but also technology is featured and design, looking at the root causes of error. And we've delved into that quite deeply. Communications are we're continually increasing our activity in this area. And we have a networking through our members' meetings, which we hold 4 times a year at the ICE. And we have a further one in Scotland. So alongside the clear productivity gains that I talked about, we should look at the other benefits of GIRI. Safety. There's studies found recently that 39% of accidents occur during rework. And sustainability, well, clearly, if we're avoiding waste, we're going to improve our carbon footprint. Well, I think quality is manifest in when one's getting it right, which improves our predictability and the reputation of both a company level and for the industry as a whole. Just a quick mention of the design guide. A group of members, clients, contractors, consultants and supply chain collaborated in the creation of our design guide in 2019. It's applicable to any project, particularly at its commencement, and so can have a direct effect on the implementation of their temporary works design. And in 2023, we carried out a survey on its use, and we've now produced some e-learning modules which will be available shortly. Our future strategy was further developed this year, and we now have 4 particular areas of focus for GIRI moving forward. And we also have some working groups. Our insurance working group is now developing a GIRI charter. The technology working group works on the research that I was talking about earlier. Our competency and compliance forum is now concentrating on assisting people in developing their competency with this myriad of competency frameworks that are now available. And our metrics research group works with the construction special interest group of the CQI, looking at cross-industry consistency in metrics. There are many areas in which we collaborate, and in particular, you'll note we collaborate with the Temporary Works Forum, and hence that's why we're here today. So I'm now going to hand on to Rob, who's going to talk about the temporary works and error. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Cliff. For those of you that know me, you know that I like to link a lot of industry areas together. So hopefully the screen's up. But just quite interestingly, how Cliff said about the working groups, the discussion, and all these things. Then the industry as a whole has a dare I say it, a series of issues. Let's be blunt. And Cliff quite rightly said Australia and America have similar issues. Well, yep, the Temple Works Forum found the same with the ASCE in America, Temple Works Forum Hong Kong. So it just shows you that what is the reason? Why are we actually having issues? Why aren't people just doing what they're supposed to do? And that's really quite rude to say, but you know where I'm coming from. This kind of industry practice. So we'll start the presentation. If I can move the screen, there we go. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Rob Millard, 27 years experience in construction. I've got a mixture of site and consultancy. So that's design, that's engineering, and there's a subtle difference between the two. It goes across several industry sectors. Currently MD of an engineering consultancy, and a role I take quite seriously is chair of the Temple Works Forum. I'm actively involved. I love being a member. I love the discussion and interest that people show. But what about the following statement? If it comes up, yep, I admit it. I have made errors in the past. I still do, let's be honest. But also I try and identify those of others as best I can. Now let's be sensible about it. We're not talking perfection. What we're trying to do is look at what is best practice. How can we go about things? If you think about the following, there's an awful lot of opportunity for error in both of those situations. How's the rebar coordinated? How's the design been actioned? Who's checking what? Who's installing what? Who's approving what? Do people know they're supposed to be checking it and approving it? Let's be honest. And I'm going to link the Temple Works process, BS 5975, in what I feel actually adds value and looks at de-risking. Likewise, with the one on the right, you've got the public, you've got interface and approvals by a lot of councils, AIPs. So there's a lot of areas that error can occur. So who has responsibility? So if we think about what GIRI says, working to eliminate error in construction, Cliff's already gone through the thing. So the definition of error, any action or inaction that results in requirement rework. A requirement for extra work or produces a defect. Defect is any failure to meet the project requirements handover. A lot of people with Temple Works think that's always to do with safety, but let's think about it. Isn't it actually the same principle? We're avoiding rework, we're avoiding errors, we're avoiding lost time and things like that. So let me go into the research report. Identified 17 root causes, top 3 of which were inadequate planning, late design changes, poorly communicated design information. For those of you familiar with Temple Works, does that sound familiar? A lot of the reasons we have questions and things like that, a lot of concerns that people are raised. So GIRI are very clear. Any change to be successful must rely on a variety of human, cultural and behavioural factors. Now that's, I think, really important because let's be honest, we really have to be human and cultural behavioural factors. A lot of things are linked that way. You only have to look at behavioural safety. Why do we have to go to those levels of behaviour when actually most of us just think, well, that's just what we should be doing. So isn't quality, isn't checking, isn't the same kind of process, same kind of thoughts. So BS 5975. Who'd have thought one of the main aims of the procedure and the method of work adopted should be to minimise the chance of errors being made and to maximise the chance of errors being discovered if they are made. Now, which one do you think came first? Was it chicken or the egg? Yeah, you see where I'm coming from. So the entire BS 5975 is also written to look at that, identify, and that's in design, that's in installation, that's in use, that's in removal. So none of this is new, but why does it have a issue still? So what else have we got? To be an effective communication. We keep saying that. Information requirements between all levels. So there's an interface between, dare I say it, technical staff, non-technical staff, people on site. We know that there's language barriers. We know that people read drawings differently. Some people look at models, some people can't read drawings. What are the procedures therefore? They're put in place to manage potential problems in temporary works which can arise from interfaces. So again, doesn't that apply to all works? Because again, those that are in the temporary works industry, we know that you can't build permanent works without temporary works, so they go hand in hand. Now, a lot of the people know that I don't like this big separation between permanent works, temporary works. But there isn't, there shouldn't be. And this process, again, kind of eludes that fact. So we can't look at temporary works in isolation because it feeds into the bigger process. So surely if we get this process in place, if we maybe get people to think about it in other aspects of work, then it helps with the principles of GIRI, getting things right, looking at options for efficiencies and safety. Work on should be directed, supervised, checked to verify. Now we know that that does take account of behaviours, supervision, ownership. But again, let's think of the temporary works. The TWC should be appointed, the temporary supervisor should be appointed, so that you know you're responsible for those activities. How many on site can actually answer that question of people and get a straight answer that they know what they're responsible for and aren't going, well, that's the engineer, that's the supervisor, that's that person, or not really too sure, I don't know. And I think we need to ask ourselves that. So again, there's a consideration that we could look at from the temporary works process, from the procedure, that can add value when it comes to safety and quality. So guidance temporary works has always followed the principles of GIRI. As far as I'm concerned, reading that statement is quite clear. So I'm going to be a bit rude. Is it therefore that other aspects of the industry need to catch up? Now, you know me, I like to just prod and poke. If we think about the above, we're not really helping the solution if we say others aren't actioning it. So what I'm saying is, to support the initiative, let's show how errors are reduced by following the principles and recommendations of the British Standard. Let's think about those in the design office. We have the appropriate category of check-in process. There was an article series put together by Serdar Dudar in the iStruct about checking in the design office. So the principles are the same. If we go back to what BS 575 says, reduce errors, spot errors, prevent them from occurring on site. That's a maturity level. Now, I myself have definitely had the odd confrontation with a checker, and I think that comes to that maturity level and stuff as well. So we have to be open and honest with ourselves and each other. So as I said, you've got the design, the installation, and use dismantling. So maybe we should share better with other parts of the industry how the temporary works procedure works. Those that run the training, those that are trained as temporary works coordinators, let's share that knowledge, let's share that understanding and quality of documentation, the process, and let's just get that enhanced and across to other people. So let me clarify something. Temporary works management is not perfect. Yeah, it suffers from the same influences as all construction work. Competence variance, lack of communication, lack of coordination, lack of cooperation, lack of checks, misuse of permits. Now, unfortunately, they are the negatives. And I'm not going to sit here and go, oh no, everything's perfect. But I'm also not going to sit here and go, oh, we don't do things right, because there's an awful lot of projects that do a lot of things right. But as the GIRI research showed, there is a degree of cost that is associated with reworks, with errors, and that cost has to be picked up by somebody, by a company, or across different projects. So there's a waste if we look at it that way. So the above is a negative snapshot rather than the wide industry actions. As I said, they are very good projects. Where the above are used positively in the manner intended, so where we have good competence that's checked, where we have suitable communication, whatever that might be, and it'll be different across different companies, across different projects, where people do coordinate, more importantly, where we cooperate. And I think everyone will probably say to themselves, when projects go well, cooperation is brilliant. When there's a slight issue or something not quite right, my own view, cooperation is very difficult to manage then. And that's where the maturity comes in. I think, unfortunately, we then delve into the cost. And I know that going way back, those that you have sat your civils chartered engineering review and stuff like that as well, they're looking for you to share how you've learned from things, almost how you've made the mistakes, what you did to solve it, how you then put it together, how you then prevented others perhaps sharing that knowledge from making the same error. So it recognises that we're not perfect, that not everyone can do the same thing. So really what we're trying to do, we're trying to catch the errors before they become greater cost due to reworks, due to safety. So it's exactly the same as we say about safety issues. We are trying to catch those errors. We're trying to catch disagreements, mistakes, whatever they might be. Maybe let's not call them mistakes. Yeah, let's call it something different. Maybe the terminology is required to help improve things. So we always use this, everyone's familiar with it. I'd imagine that the same could be said for quality, for errors and stuff like that. All those checking procedures, all those ask that question, are we sure that's right? Has this been checked? What about that? Has this been ordered? Maybe the same applies. So I think it is appropriate just to consider that if everything's aligned and things do go well, and if something isn't quite aligned, we can make things better by asking certain questions. So, dare I call it by stating a lack of risk maturity? Consider the following. Are people so scared nowadays of commercial implications that this now drives the lack of ownership and accountability? Instead of knowing that suitable cooperation, communication, coordination and competence really do actually benefit the commercial outcome by identifying and catching it before it becomes an issue. Now, some of you might go, oh, come on again, that's a bit harsh, that's a bit blunt. But is it really? We think about silos and the way sites operate. I think we have to just start being honest with ourselves, asking these kind of questions. Who is responsible for which aspects? Do they know? And I refer it back again to TWS, TWC, the accountability, the ownership. Competence is coming into more and more of our environment and how that competence is built up, how that competence is shown. So we're trying to build on these developments, we're trying to build on training, whatever it might be. So we have to share that wider knowledge and maybe think in a slightly different way. So again, GIRI Research Report, October 2023, Cliff noted this. I did a bit of reading, CPD, before we put this together. And I'd just like again to say, look, TWF want to operate and cooperate with the different bodies, different institutions. GIRI's welcomed us and we're trying to, this is the start of many, we hope, looking at different guides perhaps. But isn't the industry full of maybe siloed industrial bodies? How can we work better? How can we share the appropriate information? How can we get the message to more people? At the minute, there's 259, about to be 260 people on this call. That's a really good spectrum of people across the industry. So it's really nice to see that kind of sharing of information. So 8 areas of project lifecycle. Temporary Works covers all of those, if we're brutally honest. And I will refer back to Temporary Works because, of course, that's what we're trying to look and link and just show that there is a connection, that others can perhaps maybe delve into the control measures, the process that we put into place. So obviously logistics and transportation, well, they play a big part in the design brief, in planning, in the design stages, in the constructability. Land and planning, design, cost program, schedule, construction, waste management, commissioning, handover. And there was a ninth that was added, information and data. I think a lot of us are probably have different viewpoints on A-Connects and things like that. I'm not naming names of different software, but oh yeah, the information's online. It's over there. Well, are they being managed appropriately? Is the information there? Is it clear? How is that available? Is it available to the right people? I think we've fallen foul of some of these management systems and share of information that actually it might create a lack of dare I say, ownership and the right information. So I think we just need to be careful of that. And good old David Thomas, who I know is on this call, risk thrives at the interfaces. The Temporary Works procedure is about identifying those interfaces and looking at specific control measures in place. Again, perhaps the wider industry could look at the ITPs, could look at the quality plans and not go down the route of quality is their issue. Think about safety. Everyone always knows on their projects, safety is everyone's responsibility. So is it quality everyone's responsibility? Whether it's from the planning, whether it's from the design, whether it's from the installation, whether it's from construction, whether it's from removal, and not just will be right. Don't worry, that age-old adage, it's over-designed. A lot of people will hear that before and cringe, but it's still used on site an awful lot, and you have to just stress to people that look, it's not over designed. There's a reason, and maybe sometimes people don't understand those reasons. So again, we're trying to share that information, that quality. So the root causes of error, and one thing I want to pick up on, funnily enough, one of my favorite topics, inadequate attention paid to design and construction. A lot of people think about that. Now this is being not disrespectful to design organisations or anything like that, but the wider industry does know that there's support needed about constructability. How did the TWF help with this? Well, we've actually looked at the working group, and the working group actually is now supporting the ASCE in America, sharing some of our information. So again, that shows what Cliff said about those links. The wider industry across the world has the similar kind of issues. Now, if you want to get involved, working groups, GIRI, ourselves, other member organisations, I can't stress enough the value of them. things can only be better if people are willing to put in the time and effort and resources. So we think about buildability, temporary states, core elements and parts of the design. For those of you that are every day in temporary works, they're kind of God-given things that we actually do. But if the wider industry should consider it, then it is really important that that maybe helps remove risks of quality, because we don't have to do reworks. Now, again, you've got to be really careful. Not everything is right first time, but is there appropriate time? Have the appropriate people with competence reviewed it? So, current practice. This is from GIRI again. There is often a disincentive to measure and record errors. Although everyone in the industry privately accepts that errors occur continually, no one wants to admit that they occur on their own projects, out of concern for potential consequences for themselves, their team, or legally for the company, which fits to what I said earlier about the maturity. Have a think really on that statement. I'm pretty certain we can all think back and go, yeah, I've probably been there. I've probably thought it'll be all right. Yeah, without maybe questioning. Some of you might go, no, I've never done that. But again, come on, let's be real. You've got to have a questioning mind as well for yourself and for others in the right manner. Yeah, questioning to support, questioning to reduce errors, increase safety. So if we flip this, wouldn't it actually prevent and catch errors as far as reasonably practicable? So again, you notice we've got to be sensible. Think about health and safety as far as reasonably practicable. What is reasonably practicable? Well, it is sensible to stop and think. It is sensible to just ask that question. It is sensible to ask, has a design been checked? It is sensible to ask, who is responsible? Not so we know who to blame. Conversation that comes up a lot in temporary works training. Oh, well, am I responsible for the design as a TWC? No, you're responsible for ensuring one's done and the coordination of it, and perhaps the input and some would say the actual buildability and stuff. But that depends on the competency of people, different companies and things like that. So again, there's quite a broad spectrum of capabilities and levels within the industry. But I think if we look at things in the positive rather than the negatives, we can flip things around quite comfortably. So taking reference to intent, health and safety worker, identify risks and take sensible measures to tackle them. Yeah, I always think that that's what the temporary works procedure BS 5975 is about. What are sensible measures? Well, it's sensible to have specific persons in roles to look at specific activities and actions. Has the industry gone away from that? We still often refer to, well, we should have a clerk of works. We should have this person who's responsible for checking. But where's our own ownership? Yeah, that's what the industry wanted it moved towards. Yeah, it has to now live with it and work with it and not now think, oh, I don't like this, I want to go back. So, GIRI Design Guide, Endorsed Professional Institutions 2022. That just shows that the link. Again, we're just trying to show the link between all the different bodies, the different institutes, different parties. Establish clear roles, responsibilities. Again, for those in temporary works, sound familiar? Robust brief. Oh, hang on, that's definitely a clarity. The design brief plays a massive part. So the better the design brief, will that help us at the end result? Peer reviews. Isn't this the same category design checks? Yeah. So the review, the understanding, it's not about picking on people. It's ensuring that errors haven't been followed up and delivered onto a drawing and then put out onto site. And I think, in all honesty, like I said at the start, I make mistakes and I try and help spot those of others. We can all do that if we're mature enough and actually assist and help people. So design and construction, GIRI states, buildability is rarely given proper consideration during the design development process. It's maybe due to designers lacking a full understanding of construction processes. Now, again, I'm going to stand up for engineers and different practices, because it is a little unfair to have that as such a generic statement. However, we do know there's so many ways to build things. So what I would say is get the right support at the right time. And I think that is mature. Instead of thinking we can do this or not, get the right support. And that's at any stage of a project, whether it's design, early doors, intent, feasibility. Get the right support, right competence at the right time. And then it helps with the ability to look at construction, look at the buildability of things in the design, and then obviously in the follow-on output. So we think about it, same topics and points get raised whenever betterment is identified, if we're brutally honest. There's always culture keeps getting mentioned. Collaboration, these are all key words. Planning, information communication. I think wherever we look in the industry where things want to improve, these are the common threads. So we need to be able to build on those, understand what they actually mean, and remove any silos that are actually blocking this. So what are you going to do to improve the situation on your project, your office, your company, your supply chain, with your client perhaps, with your institute, or dare I say it, with yourself? Because let's be honest, these webinars are really quite useful if we then follow it up. What do people take away from it? Yeah, that's what I like to say. So, you know me, ask questions, try and give you some food for thought. So where are we going to end up next? What I'd like to say is thank you for listening, as always, to what I've got to say. I'm going to hand over to Alexandros, and he's going to actually present some thoughts. And it was interesting when we put this together. The mindset's often looking for the fault instead of looking for the positive. And hopefully Alexandros is going to explain now some of the positives that are actually brought out that reduced reworks and things like that. And what I would just say is, how many on the call know if their companies are members of GIRI or not? Because trying to find people that knew they were members of both kind of fits with the silo mentality sometimes in companies. So Cliff, that might be something we could work on together just to try and link that. So Alexandros, I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully you're still there and good to go.
Thank you. Oh. Hello. Okay.
Alexandros, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay. Good. Sorry about that. Start over. So my name is Alexandros Mantzaris. I'm the lead temporary works design manager for the Skanska Costain Strabag joint venture. We work on the HS2 main works, lot S1 and S2 contract. You can see on the screen here, it's area south. And we're essentially responsible for the London tunnels area. Just again, a bit of a very quick overview. The project spans from West Ruislip to Euston. We are building the tunnels in between. We've already launched and finished 5 TBM drives, and our last 2 TBM drives are on the way to Houston at the moment. We are also responsible for ventilation shafts, head houses, crossover boxes, portals, earthworks, and anything else in between. So just to give you an idea of the scale of the project, I just pulled this last week from our temporary works register. We have around 6,300 items in our temporary works register. At the moment, around 4,200 designs completed and another 500 in assurance. Again, just to give you an idea of the scale. So what we wanted to do today is to share a bit of insight from our project with regards to errors, with regards to where we see from the GIRI initiative reports and kind of remarks, and also Rob's that there is alignment on where this may happen. Also how we in the project are trying to deal with it. And I think Rob made an important point that it's not about trying to come up with a system that ideally prevents any and all errors always. Being realistic, we need to always be vigilant, not be complacent, and come up with systems that can be checked at any stage by the competent people to identify if there are any errors, and obviously catch them early enough so that they don't have any serious consequences, whether it be safety, cost, or program. So moving along, and you'll see there's a bit of a similar theme with before and with temporary works overall, where we've seen some sources of errors in more frequent is competency and training. So essentially what we mean about that, having the right people and also having enough resources to do the job. And as you saw, our project has a lot of disciplines, a lot of different types of temporary work. So we can't have a person that's responsible for everything. We need to have the right person at the right time for each thing. Program allowances and planning, that's already been talked a lot about today. So this has to do with being sure that the right information is there at the time that we need it. As temporary works, we have the temporary works design brief, which is an excellent tool to plan things. However, it needs to take into account all the assurances, all the interfaces that Rob was mentioning before that may extend the program. And a lot of times programs are very sophisticated, very detailed, but temporary works is a niche discipline, and people need to be aware that sometimes the time for approval of temporary works is underestimated, and this may end up in putting people under pressure and potentially creating errors. Availability of information at the right time, as mentioned, is not always there, but we need to make our best to get it right, get it reviewed by the right people. Design and management of interfaces. In SCS, we have a lot, whether this is our own client, our own permanent works, other temporary works, which is such a large project that can sometimes interface. And also, of course, third parties such as Network Rail, Transport for London, utility asset owners, you have it. Also, we have a lot of subcontractors doing work for us. It's quite a huge project, so we are not able to obviously carry out the work on ourselves, and we get drained from the knowledge of very competent and useful subcontractors. However, this, as we mentioned before, is an additional interface which creates risk. So we need to be sure that all our subcontractors have the same understanding of temporary works, have a good understanding of the process that we are setting out, and making sure there is nothing lost in between. Material specification and procurement is another one that was mentioned, to make sure that the quality is first, the material is right for the quality we want to achieve, and also the procurement of it and the right specification of it, which I'll come on to an example later. Specialist equipment, as mentioned, we are not able to be a specialist of everything, so there will be sectors we know that need a specialist subcontractor, a specialist expert, just to make sure we get the knowledge. Late changes, again, is something that can happen and is sometimes unavoidable. However, this is an area where we found that, a lot of effort has gone into a design to get it to a certain stage that is close to being completed, and a late change potentially jeopardizes a lot of risk elimination that has happened so far, a lot of communication that has happened so far, a lot of the right people reviewing things. And when a late change is happening, to repeat all that is difficult, and it's sometimes jeopardizing getting something missed. And finally, want to mention is maintenance. So again, so much effort is going into planning, managing, designing temporary works, but it actually doesn't finish when they go up on site, because we need to make sure that they are working as we intended them to work, that we are inspecting them to make sure they stay as they should stay, that monitoring as well is happening where required. And of course, dismantling, which can be a very high risk area, because it's easy for people to think, okay, we came up with how to build it, we'll just do the reverse and take it down. But sometimes, as we know, conditions change on the ground. So it can be the site layout has changed, it can be the space has changed, it can be the team doing the work has changed, the availability of plant has changed. So it's an area where errors can happen if it's not looked into it with a lot of focus. So I'll move on to the tools that we try to deploy and how we use them in order to try and prevent error as much as possible. The first is the temporary works procedure. Rob mentioned that essentially BS 5975 has set out a roadmap for us on how to deal with temporary works and prevent errors. In our case, we are also using PAS 8811 on major infrastructure client procedures, and we have created a specific project temporary works on how we want to deal with temporary works in our project, which is how everyone needs to operate and under the same procedure. It includes the specific interfaces we have, it includes the types of works that we're doing and how we want to work in our project. Now, moving on, we talked a lot about competency and appointments. So we have a system and power-ups that allow us to appoint, as per BS 5975 requirement, the people that need to be appointed, i.e. mainly the temporary work supervisor and coordinator. So the designated individual and their delegates can jump in, record all the training that person has, record their experiences, and then log it on a live system that is accessible by the right people to make sure that everything is up to looking, they have the competency to do it. We do the same with the temporary works designers using a competency assessment system, meaning any design team that is doing work on the project needs to have the right competency. So we score them against types of temporary works to make sure everyone does the same thing. Of course, it's not just temporary works professionals that deal with temporary works on a big project. So we always need to be conscious that there is commercial people, there is safety people, there is people on site, there is a lot of other disciplines that need to be involved with temporary works to get it right. So what we need to do is to come up with temporary works awareness courses, which we have on the project. This can be on design awareness. This can be on how to write a temporary works design brief. So this is very important because this is where the input information, as mentioned before, is coming from, and this will control the quality of the outputs a lot of the time. So we do hold dashboards on the project. We record everything electronically to make sure it's up to date and everyone has the training that they should have. Now, what we also have is a quality management system, which is essentially an online platform of temporary works, and we use it in order to manage the works, to plan them, and also with a couple of other features that I will quickly go through now. So all items of temporary works are on the register. They have a unique reference number. Now, in terms of the planning mentioned before, one of the advantages that this tool has is it allows the temporary works coordinator to jump in the beginning, and as you would usually do with a temporary works design brief, examine all the risks, whether it be execution, design complexity, consequence of failure, come up with a category, and also mark down all the relevant interfaces, which, as I mentioned before, can be multiple in our project. What we've done then is we've come up with a calculation that will estimate, including all these options, how long this item of temporary works may take. What does this mean? It means that we can also come up with a date where the temporary works design brief needs to be at the hands of the designer, or checked or reviewed, so that it can come out the other end with enough time to do all the procurement, to do all the installation, everything that we need to do. So this helps us with the planning and management. Now, the system is used by all relevant parties to share the deliverables and to progress the items of temporary works. And once the works are done, our TWCs are able to create permits to load with hold points, that then evidence is uploaded, the hold points are signed off as compliant, and then the permit also signed off in the system. Also, inspection records as needed based on the design are done and saved there. Now, obviously, we have, because we have this wealth of data, we are able to produce dashboards such as the one that I have on the screen. And essentially, what does this do? It lets us know that our system is working. It lets us know that everything is going as we planned, and there's no areas of focus that we need to intervene. And if we do, obviously we do. Obviously, as mentioned before, this is great to have all this data, to have all this system, but at the same time, what is paramount is that people are invested in it, people are using them correctly, and people are putting in the right information so that what comes out is correct. Otherwise, you know, we can't be complacent that we have all these dashboards. It actually needs to work correctly, and the right information needs to be there. Finally, I just wanted to mention the design acceptance process. Again, because we have a lot of people working on the project, sometimes subcontractors that may not have worked before, we try to train as much as possible, but we also have an additional layer of safety, which is the design acceptance process. And this is where if an external person is designing something, also an internal SCS engineer needs to have a look, and we set some parameters for them to check the competencies I mentioned before. So making sure that the competency is on the record, it has been checked and signed off, and it's relevant to the items of temporary work being designed. Also, there is no deleterious effect to third-party asset. What does this mean? A subcontractor may come in lacking a bit of context. They may not know they're next to an asset that needs additional assurance. So our engineers have this context. They can flag it up just in case it has been missed. Then there's also carbon reporting consideration and permanent works interface. Finally, we talked about risk ownership, and this is an output from our procedure, so a snapshot from our procedure to show how we intend to deal with risk. So in our view, it will start with identification of it in the temporary works design brief. So both the site team and the temporary works coordinators will identify what are the main risks. That is because of site conditions. This is because of the plan that is available, because of how the work has been in concept plan to be done. So this is passed on to the designer, who is then, as far as possible, obviously eliminating or reducing the risk, and they are producing a design with all this consideration and a designer's risk assessment to show what they've done about this risk, have they dealt with them in a technical way, or if not possible, pass on residual risk through the design's risk assessment. The temporary works coordinator will accept these risks, and then he has the responsibility to brief the team, explain what the designer is saying exactly, and explain in a reasonable and realistic manner what needs to be done about them, how they need to be controlled. All these systems will be transferred into the risk assessment method statement, and then they will be controlled, monitored, and inspected, as discussed before, and if the situation needs that, handed over to the final user. Now, I would like to go through a couple of examples just to illustrate what we were saying before and sort of show how the system is working for us. The first example I would like to go through is a case where we were being handed over an area by another subcontractor, and it was seen as a good opportunity to use this as additional storage for one of our sites, where we would store material or any surplus proprietary formwork and so on that we would have, with operating cranes in the area and sort of kind of a small logistics center. Now, we were handed over the temporary works design brief, and as usually we'll have good information on what is the ground composition, some trial pits, what are the site limits, some environmental considerations, which as always are also very important. However, upon review, both the coordinator and designer spotted that in some of the pictures there was some manholes present. So we said, okay, we just got this site. What is the information we have on them? Is there a health and safety file? Let's look at the handover information. And that was requested, and we realized that there is actually a shaft on location in combination with obviously the manholes and then some sensitive assets from a third-party owner. So obviously this reduced the capacity to use this as a storage area or for a crane to operate and the logistical routes. So after that, we had a discussion, and obviously we had to choose another location. So this was an error that was realized in the temporary works design brief stage. The temporary works designer and coordinator in this case were reviewing the information and picked up that there might have been a gap there. There is the lack of handover information at the right time. As I mentioned, in this case, the resolution was to not pursue any further this plan and get a final, an alternative location. And as Rob mentioned before, seeing this as a value added, the fact that it was cut then, it was avoiding third-party impact. Also, it was avoiding delay of works when it was realized the plan would not have worked, any separate routes that would have been to go another way. The second example, it has to do with design interface. So what we have on the screen here is one of our launch chambers in a 3D model together with a conveyor structure. So these were two separate designs being designed by two separate organizations. So summary information was shared and the briefs contained, let's say, all the right things. But as you may notice, the temporary works propping scheme at that stage was still not finalized on the whaler information, which was missing from what was shared. As a result, a design was developed by the conveyor steelwork designer that when the first preliminary drawing started coming in and being reviewed by delivery team and the coordinator, it was realized there was actually a clash between the temporary works whaler propping scheme and the conveyor steelwork. So once this was realized, we of course got the two designers in a room and we tried to figure out how to best proceed from this point. Due to space constraints and the fact that we had to also keep an open haul road for tunnel, utility vehicles and everything else, it was seen that actually there was not much we could do to move around the material. So we decided that in this case, we could redesign the whaler in order to be able to achieve an opening where the class location was, and also put additional bracing on the conveyor steelwork in order to make sure no additional loads were proposed. So again, the error was caught at a relatively early stage, even though the plan did not change significantly. Had we not realized this before getting to site, it could have led to a lot of delay and a lot of rework, and people again under pressure trying to find a solution. So this was caught in the preliminary submission stage. It was delivery and TWC reviewing the PO1 drawings. The root cause was design interface. We resolved it by the technical queries to the two designers and performing the additional strengthenings and modifications required. And the value added, again, avoiding class on site, avoiding delay, avoiding additional design, and more than anything, the errors that would have come from doing this in the last minute. The third example I would like to go through is a crane platform that was supposed to do a lift under possession. So the design consisted of granular material being laid, overlain by crane mats, and then by the crane performing the lift. During the hold point inspection at the early stage, the TWC went out to see how the compaction and installation of material was being carried out, and it was realized that the material that had been used was not exactly the material that was specified by the designer. Instead, it was crushed material that was utilized from another site, as it was seen as a faster solution to utilize this material. Now, be it as it may that the material could have been stronger, obviously was not what was specified in the design. So in order to avoid the error, we had to go back to the designer, provide all the available information, provide additional information on the grading of the material, on the type, where it came from, and specifying additional testing to make sure it's the same or stronger than the original design material. So that was at the perimeter load stage. During the hold point inspection and sign-off, there was this material specification and procurement of it, and maybe planning of the procurement. The resolution was the technical query raised to check the new material, which, as I mentioned, came up back fine. A value added, safeguarding possession, avoiding delay, and avoiding any crane's delay costs. This is a recurring thing sometimes, and something that GIRI has has highlighted in a good way, is that, you know, sometimes specifying material may be seen as something that is in the final stage. You know, if something takes too long to be procured, or maybe I can just use what I already have, or maybe I can use an alternative product. However, it's important to understand that changing that product could result into design changes. So it's just people being aware that they may be doing that when they are doing this. The final example I have, before wrapping up, is another about material specification. So this is a false work design from one of our sites, where a false work will be stood up in order to support still fixing, access, and eventually a concrete slab pour. So that was successfully done. And as you can see, in the stage where we're doing the inspection and signing off the hold points, it was observed that a few of the ledgers actually looked slightly different than the rest, and also slightly different than what the supplier data sheet was showing them to be. In some cases, maybe with some additional members or just with different members. So the TWC raised this up with a subcontractor, and it was realized that some of this stock was actually historical, and it was coming, I think, from the 70s, if I'm not wrong, which, you know, it was used successfully back then, but it could mean that it's actually not in compliance with the current material data sheets, and it was something that would be difficult to justify. Also, some of them have undertaken modifications, again, potentially maybe making them stronger, but we didn't have a clear track record of when this happened, how this happened, and how this is impacting the stock material. So again, this was done at the permit to load sign-off stage from a hold point, from a temporary works coordinator inspection. Material specification, stock material could be a reuse because of that. So we removed the material that was had these issues. There were some cases where this material was creating a lot of risks for being removed and a lot of safety risks. So in these cases, we came up with a plan to strengthen them, put additional bracing in, so that we could make sure they were performing as intended. This went back to the designer, it went back to a checker, it was signed off, seen as safe, and the value was added, potential weak points eliminated, any delay avoided, and also the stock in question was quarantined not to be reused in our project. This is the last slide I have. I would just like some closing thoughts to wrap this up. Is we have a system in place. We don't want to be complacent, so we have a lot of checks and measures to make sure. And at all stages, the most important thing for us, and as you see in these examples I presented, is always a person that is competent, being there at the right time, reviewing what we are doing, and making sure of catching any errors, eliminating them, and make sure they are resolved. Thank you very much. That's all from me.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexandros. That's really, really useful. Cliff, we've only got a couple of minutes for questions, so if you're able to just pick a couple of questions that you think would be most pertinent, and any other questions we don't get to, we can respond to by email.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think looking at the we've got questions and we've got chat. So looking at the chat, there's been quite a discussion there about the time when temporary works get their brief and the importance of that, and but there's a lack of sufficient detail. And I think we Is that something that we're finding is an issue, Rob, that the brief is not as detailed as it ought to be?
So I think it's an easy one to say it's not. For those that know the importance of the design brief, we spend an awful lot of time trying to justify and get people to raise the detail. What I would say is the permanent works that I've worked on, and over the years, I think, dare I say it, the brief might be so wide that it's very difficult to nail it down at a certain stage, and maybe it's a mindset thing. So in temporary works, because we look at more maybe localized, more specific issues, you can be a bit more detailed in the design brief. But if we're blunt, if we look at the what's it called, the software industries and anything like that, they're even worse at briefs. What they actually refer to is the scope creep. So I think permanent works, dare I say, is more scope creep than nailing down the brief. I think temporary works, because it's quicker and a bit more relevant and recent, then you nail down that scope creep better. So that's one way of putting it. Alexandros might probably think the same on high speed 2. That's probably the biggest thing, I'd imagine, scope creep.
Yes, definitely. It's just making sure that everyone is, on board. And again, a lot of the time we find some briefs will be raised and they will have generally the right information. But as the brief develops, there is workshopping going on and realizing that maybe a different direction is needed, maybe additional information is needed. Potentially, this is a meeting that could have happened earlier on. But yeah, because we have these processes in place, we are generally able to catch it on time, let's say.
Yeah, I think the HS2 examples you came up with are really highlighted how important that input at the early stages. We've been talking about HS2. Do you find that is consistent across the industry, that we're bringing the temporary works design into the picture during the design development stages for a project, or do you think it's a sort of add-on when the contractor comes in and introduces the whole concept of buildability?
$1 million question. Network Rail do certain projects very well, and there's a lot of time spent in looking at buildability. I think a lot of projects would say likewise, and then there's the flip side. The industry cannot say one's right, one's wrong. It's what's appropriate at times, people's experience and things like that. I think it just comes down to, again, the maturity, get the right people at the right time, and maybe understand at what level is appropriate. I think the industry and temporary works can be a little bit like that. Right, we need to know the answers right at the start. No, you need to know the appropriate level of detail at the right time, and then that builds through the entire project process. So again, we have to work together as an industry. Not you need to understand everything now, temporary works, get it in there, buildability. But going back to working group 45 for TWF, the constructability, buildability, you picked it up in your review process. Joint board of moderators has it in their background, in their build up, and yet the industry believes it's gone away. Well, who's let it go away? Again, if we're brutally honest, why? Is it maturity? Is it ownership? Again, there's lots of different questions. I think each of us on this call just needs to ask in our own organisation, has it gone away? If so, why? It'd be interesting afterwards to look at the split of who's on this call. I would have a stab in the dark that the majority would be contractor biased, if I'm brutally honest. So what we have to look at is how do we get the perceived specialisms of the industry to actually get better involved with this, considering Ed Mosley is one of the drivers of GIRI. Why is the rest of the industry not jumping on it?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately we've run out of time now, so we're going to have to draw this discussion to a close. But I think that it's been a very interesting webinar. And Rob, thanks for your overview of the situation, and Alexandros, really good insight into what's been happening on HS2. I think the general public don't have any concept of the depths the engineering excellence that's going into producing this great railway, and just looking at those 3 or 4 examples of where you've avoided potential impacts through the avoidance of error just shows what we can achieve. So well done to you, and well done to the HS2 team that you're part of. And thank you to everybody that's turned up today. We've got we're back down to 200 now. Some people have gone off for their lunch, but it's been a really great call, and I hope you got something out of it to take away and improve your contribution to the industry. So thank you very much. Cheerio.